Excited to welcome everyone to our joint meeting between the Town Council and the Planning Commission tonight. It's a study session to discuss economic vitality and just the changing environment as we all look towards as we all look to predict what the future will look like. One of the key things that we've asked ourselves is what else can happen. And so we have a great group of panelists tonight to help inform the council and the planning commission and staff on the factors that they're seeing, boots on the ground. And we hope that we gather some great information, have great conversation between the council and the commission and our public. And we really look forward to the conversation. So welcome everyone. Before we begin, if we could just do a roll call.
Thank you and good evening. Commissioner Barnett.
Present.
Commissioner Birch.
Present.
Commissioner Janoff.
Present.
Commissioner Suzuki.
Present.
Commissioner Hanson. Commissioner Tavana. Commissioner Thomas.
Present.
Councilmember Badami.
Present.
Councilmember Hudis.
Present.
Councilmember Risto.
Here.
Vice Mayor Rennie.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Syak.
Here, thank you very much. And so tonight we only have one item on our agenda, but as we do with all other meetings, we have opportunity for verbal communications. I see several members in our attendees panel. And so if anyone would like to speak to us tonight on something that is not specific to our study session agenda item, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any hands raised there. And so I'm going to flip the question is if anyone would like to provide comments before we get into the study session and specific to tonight's conversation, raise your hand also. Now's the time to basically share your thoughts. Okay, I see no hands raised. And so I turn to our staff for discussion and a preview on what's on the staff report. So.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, Chair and Planning Commission. I'm Monica Wren, the Economic Vitality Manager for the town of Los Gatos. And staff is here tonight. We're pleased to be before you with this study session. We've done these in the past, and they've been a really great opportunity for us to get together as a group to hear from some of the folks, as you said, the boots on the ground, doing the work in our town, working with our businesses, working with prospective businesses, landowners. And I believe tonight we have a pretty broad representation of Los Gatos. We have some downtown folks and folks that are working in shopping centers. So in the interest of saving your time to spend as much time as possible with our panel, I'll keep this report very short, but please know that staff is here, our whole team is here to support you this evening in your discussion. We try to be pretty thorough in the background and in the attachments of all the streamlining that's been taking place. And we just look forward to your discussion tonight, and we're here to support you any way we can. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And in the staff report, we were able to provide some bios of our panelists tonight, just to give everyone a preview of how I plan to run tonight's meeting. We'll welcome and give every panelist an opportunity to share more information about themselves. We do have some introductory questions, and then we do have the questions that we polled all of you on, and we'll start from the ones that garnered the most interest and go down that list. I really want to make sure we have opportunity for conversation. So there are going to be natural breaks along the way. And so at that point, I'll be asking people I'll pause and ask for those that want to ask questions and have those conversations. And then at the end, we'll have an ability for wrap up based on what we hear and see if there's anything that we want to move forward with. So with that being said, I will again welcome all the panelists and thank you for your time tonight. I know that it's at the end of the evening. Sometimes the last thing we want to do is be on a Zoom meeting. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to go alphabetical, but the first person I'd like to welcome is Cindy Johnson. She is the Director of Construction at Western States Construction Management Group. Cindy, please introduce yourself and share your experience in Los Gatos. And then if you can, just share with us how your work in your shopping centers, how you plan for redevelopment, reuse of spaces. I think what's different about private shopping centers is that you have an ability to shape your entire space versus downtown where it's individually owned. And I think we'd love to learn that insight.
Sure. Well, thank you, Mayor, council members, commissioners, staff, everybody, other panelists. I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to be here too. I've done this once before, and it is a great opportunity to speak directly to you. So thank you, and the community. So, obviously, elephant in the room for everybody is COVID. It's had a huge impact on everyone, I suspect, but for us, it has forced us to be creative. We have certain tenants. So actually, I'm sorry, I should back up. Donahue Schreiber owns, I'm one of the shopping center contingent people, because we own Los Gatos Village Square and Downing Center. I am the construction, I work for the company that's the construction arm of Donahue Schreiber. So we deal with entitlements, construction, tenant turnover, all those kinds of things. So the impact from COVID for us has been, or for Donahue Schreiber has been, we have certain tenants that do wonderfully well, like the grocery stores and, things that have been the day-to-day needs of people, but other tenants not so much, and we've had a big impact. So it's forced us to get very creative in how we deal with tenant turnover. Obviously, the first focus is doing everything we can to keep existing tenants, because that's best for everybody long term, of course. But then when tenants do turn over, it's looking at things. We're not frankly spending a lot of money on major redevelopment, like facade remodels or changes to the centers. It's really more dealing with trying to attract the right kind of tenants that can deal with both the short term and, of course, long term viability. That's tough because right now there's a lot of tenants that are very hesitant to commit. They don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, we hope that in the next year or so things get more back to normal. But for us, we're looking at things like redemising in creative ways. We've had tenants that want to downsize or occasionally expand, and we've ended up trading spaces. Just trying to do everything we can to accommodate people. And as I say, as far as redevelopment, we're really not doing a whole lot. I think it's really just trying to attract and keep.
Thank you for that. And it's good to know, attract and keep, that's definitely seems to be the familiar thing that we've been hearing from many of our landowners. So, okay, Mr. Kreshik, Jeff Kreshik is Senior Vice President of West Coast Leasing for Federal Realty. Welcome. We had an opportunity to talk with you earlier this year. But Jeff, if you could introduce yourself and share a bit about your experience in Los Gatos. Federal has a shopping center downtown, but they also have a shopping center on Los Gatos Boulevard. Two different sites, two different characters. And so if you can share with us how you use your strategies depending on location and how you lease, and whether you use one versus the other more effectively, and what we should be mindful of as you continue your work in Los Gatos. So.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having us. And we appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. So I represent Federal Realty Investment Trust. We're a publicly traded REIT based in Rockville, Maryland, with offices in San Jose and Los Angeles. We have two very, very different assets in Los Gatos. We have Old Town Center in downtown, and then we have Kings Court. You'd be challenged to find two things that are more different, but what's common between them, and when you talk about the strategy, what really is important is they're both retail. They both have to have a why. Why do they exist? Why are they important to the consumer? Why does it matter to a tenant? Why does a tenant matter to a project? So we really try to define the why of each project. we're very fortunate with Kings Court to have a very successful longtime tenant, Lunardi's, who's been just excellent for this community for quite some time, very vested, and really a very solid operator that's here for the long run. And we built the strategy a little bit around them. I would tell you that it's not quite as much strategy when you get into a market drug center. It's more about the basics and necessities, but that is the why. Why people shop there is because it's convenient, because it's accessible, because it's daily needs, and because it fills all of the needs that that you have just as you go through your life. Old Town Center has been a little bit more of a puzzle. So Old Town Center sort of started as and this all predates me. I've only been with Federal for 10 years, but the tenancy there originally sort of started more as a lifestyle tenancy with Gap and Banana Republic and Talbot's. But clearly the market has morphed. So that center is going to have to kind of find its new why, its new reason for existing and purpose and connection to the community. And as I mentioned in our conversation a few months ago, and Monica Wren and I have spoken for a few years about this, ultimately it is going to require a substantial remerchandising of the project. But again, it all comes centered around a strategy as to why is that asset relevant to the consumer? Why is it relevant to retailers? Why are retailers relevant to the project? And you might have seen that we recently opened Sephora. And that's a real good example in our mind of finding a new vein to bring to the project, finding a new type of tenant to bring to the project, and putting some new life into the project. So we don't really play them off of each other, but the discipline of having a strategy, coming up with a logic for why each asset needs to exist and what they need to be is the same throughout the projects. It doesn't matter how different they are, the discipline has to be the same. And quite frankly, we think that both have a really, really great future in Los Gatos and can be relevant for many years to come. It's just going to take some work.
Thank you. And it was exciting to have Sephora open. So I'm glad.
Yes.
I know many of our retailers are glad as well. Speaking of downtown, welcome, Jim Foley. You are principal at Pennant Properties. And you wear a variety of roles in Los Gatos commercial real estate. Through your work in downtown Los Gatos, share your thoughts on what prospective businesses are looking for when they consider a space downtown. Yours, downtown is unique in that there's several landowners that are involved versus the larger commercial property that can look at it in a more holistic environment. So if you could share, what are the specific amenities and space sizes that are trending, and what are you seeing based on the conversations you're hearing about downtown?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks to everybody that's here tonight, Honorable Town Council, distinguished planning commissioners. I know many of you, I guess for better or for worse, but for those of you that don't, as the mayor kind of pointed out, I kind of wear a few different hats around town. I'm a commercial broker, and I'm involved in a lot of leasing and sales transactions with various properties in town. I'm also a partner in a couple of different businesses downtown, including Rootstock Wine Bar and a couple of other ventures. And I've volunteered a lot for the town over the years, sitting on different boards and commissions, the General Plan Update Advisory Committee, things like that. So I feel like I kind of have a good understanding from a bunch of different angles as to what's going on around town, what different tenants are looking for, what as a business owner I think needs to be done to make the downtown successful. So hopefully I can help out tonight, provide some feedback from those different various roles. I think the question that you asked is kind of where is downtown headed, and that's a really challenging question. Things evolve over time. I think generally speaking, Los Gatos just offers a really tremendous product with the variety of uses that it currently has. And I think, over time, we're seeing things tweak in a little different direction. You pointed out things like size, space type, use type. I think, overall, we're headed in a very good direction, setting aside the recent hiccup that we've had with the pandemic. And I think that the work that has been done by previous town council, previous planning commission, economic vitality department, has really set the stage for Los Gatos to thrive as we go into the future. You may or may not know or be familiar with a lot of the streamlining efforts and policy changes that were put into place over the past couple of years. And those really allowed Los Gatos to grow and become more competitive than it ever has in maybe the previous 2 or 3 decades. So, when you say what is everyone looking for, I mean, I think most tenants that come to town or are looking to locate in like a street retail environment, they're really looking for, what Los Gatos has to offer. They want, vibrancy, pedestrian friendly, mix of uses and things like that. So I think what we're looking at doing as we go forward is just how do we fine tune how we deliver, that variety of uses, and how do we deliver, I guess, an attractive and an easy environment for a consumer to get to. Retail has been impacted, I think we all know that, by online sales. So things might be trending a bit smaller, but it's hard just to broadly categorize everything, that everything's reducing in size, because I don't think that's fair either. I think we're just going to see an evolution over the next 5 to 10 years of what retailing looks like. I think that food uses are becoming higher in demand. I mean, I think they've always been king, but I think as we've talked about this through the years, the way that people are visiting Los Gatos is shifting. It's instead of coming down to shop at all the unique boutiques and shops and retailers that we've had, and then maybe visit a food establishment while they're there, it's the reverse. It's more they're coming to look to a placemaking environment where there is restaurants, things that are entertaining to them, activities, festivals, things like that. And then they may shop while they're here because they're primarily sitting on the couch using this or whatever they're doing now, to order their goods and things like that. So, I think that this is something we've discussed. We discussed it 3 years ago. A lot of it informed a lot of those policy changes and the streamlining efforts. And I think we're just now seeing some of the results. We're seeing some new uses in places that weren't available to them before. So I'm excited to see where this all heads. I think there's a lot of pent up demand for new businesses to come into town, emerging out of the pandemic, as we come out and people are a little more confident in starting those businesses. And I think in connection with, the general plan, which is, been a little bit delayed by the pandemic, but probably very timely for emerging, there's a lot of opportunities to really take out our paintbrush and kind of map out where this is all going to go over the next, I guess, 2 or 3 decades. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your question about, what we've been seeing, what I've been seeing, and, where kind of I think that things are headed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And welcome, Keaston Smith, President and CEO of Silker Orchards. So, as others, please introduce yourself and your work in Los Gatos. But seeing as how Silker Orchards manages different types of real estate in Silicon Valley, I'd love if you can share with us what makes a neighborhood shopping center in Los Gatos unique, desirable for businesses, and how the town could further support private shopping centers. So, as we've tried to look at streamlining, as Mr. Foley had said, how do we ensure that the larger community knows we're open for business?
Right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for welcoming me to this panel. I think I'm probably the newbie here, and so I appreciate you bringing me on. As some of you may or may not know, I'm a Los Gatos lifer. I went to Los Gatos High, grew up in Los Gatos. My family's been there for quite a while. We've been landowners in that area for multiple generations. In fact, I'm third generation leadership. I'm the third generation president of the company, and so I'm just very pleased with the opportunity to be here and talk about our property there, Cornerstone, Los Gatos. What we found that makes our neighborhood center desirable for businesses is that we feel that they're, and this is something that I think the town is really has been able to, it sounds like you've been working through and identifying, but is that they're really looking for a place that creates a synergy of tenants. Well, where there's a good quality of mix of tenants that work together. They want a place that feels safe, that's beautiful. We've worked very hard when we first developed the center to provide the community with something that they could be proud of for years to come. There's kind of a saying in our office there that old buildings or ugly buildings live forever, and we don't ever want to try. We really want to try and beautify and really make attractive properties that people want to be at, and that creates an environment for and a desire to bring tenants. It's just a natural thing. And so we've been very fortunate, even during the pandemic, that while we've had to help some of our tenants along, we really have had no lack of interest in the center, and we've maintained full occupancy. And we credit that to the amount of reinvestment in beautification and just attractiveness of the center. We work really, really hard on that. So that's part of what we think it creates is one of the keys to success for a desirable center. And then, in terms of how the town can support shopping centers, I think that extends outward. That same kind of philosophy extends outwards to the town. Just as other panelists were saying here, retail is becoming really tough. I mean, we are now just buying everything through Amazon, and it gets delivered. Shopping is an event. If you want to go out and buy something, you've got to really want to go do it. And if you want to go do it, you want to go somewhere that feels safe, is attractive. Maybe you can hit one or two other stores at the same time. And so it's not something. I mean, if you don't have to do it anymore. I mean, you can just sit at home and buy something online. If you're going to go out, it needs to be something that there's got to be a reason. It's got to be an enticement. And so what we're really trying to do with our center is create an environment where not only the tenants feel that they're vital and important to each other and the center and the center's operation, but to the community as a whole, so that there's a synergy of not only the public wanting to be there because of how the center's maintained, but also that the tenants want to be there as well. So I hope that's helpful.
That is, thank you very much. And as I mentioned earlier, we did send out some questions to the council and planning commission and ask them to rank them. And we're just going to go through the questions, those that receive the highest level of interest. After each question, council and commissioners, if you'd like any follow-up questions based on that, I'll be looking towards people to raise their hand and we can begin to engage in that conversation. So the question that received the most interest: what are the current trends in business models and use types? So you've touched upon some of that already, but what are the most prominent models and uses currently looking for new or expanded spaces? And I'll look to the four of you, whoever would like to answer that first. Just either raise your hand or either through the raise hand feature or just on the screen.
I'll go ahead if that's okay.
Yes, please, Jeff.
Yeah, as far as the use types that we're seeing, certainly you're seeing a fair amount of health and wellness. That was a big trend going into COVID. Certainly coming out of COVID, it's a big trend as people want to try to live a healthier lifestyle, and they realize the benefits of that. So you're certainly seeing quite a bit of that, whether it's health and wellness in the form of medical, concierge medical, all the way to, I mean, we've seen some things, everything from cryo to float tanks to IV drips. I mean, it's really pretty incredible how segmented that category has become Fitness, I think will certainly make a comeback. I think it will be a different format of fitness. I think some of the franchise concepts are probably going to have a harder time surviving this, whereas the top concepts in fitness will probably come out of this certainly beaten up, but they'll survive. I think the trend that we're seeing the most, though, is downsizing. Is right sizing, not just physical space, but right sizing store counts, downsizing fleets, and downsizing how you interact with the tenant within that store. Do you need a large format store? Do you need a smaller format store? Can you do more with less? And can you make that experience a little bit more personable? One of the big knocks you hear about department stores is they're just so big and unshoppable. So you see things in the press like Macy's looking now to do Marketplace by Macy's, which is taking their 150 to 200,000 square foot department store and shrinking it down to 20,000 square feet to 30,000 square feet. You're hearing about stores, retailers optimizing their fleets by getting rid of a number of stores. I think probably most famous was, or most notable was Gap's announcement that they were going to close, quite a number of stores, most of which are going to be in enclosed malls. So I think you definitely are seeing the downsizing of the retail size footprint, as well as the downsizing of stores within a retailer's footprint. But there are some really interesting trends happening. The digitally native brands, I think, is another one that's really important. Brands that have primarily lived with their customer online are now realizing the importance of brick and mortar retail. They certainly don't need a ton of it, but they do need some, if nothing more than just as information centers for their customers. There's a lot of people who just are not comfortable with shopping online, or they're missing too many customers that they could get with a physical presence, but they need to be very, very select with that physical presence.
Thank you. And Keiston, I saw you had your hand raised. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, no, I think I'd just like to echo what Jeff was saying there. We've had quite a few. I think everything has turned into more of a specialty nature, at least in Los Gatos. What we've noticed, the more focused fitness centers, the IV drip thing, that seems to be at least, and it may be the demographic, to be honest, that we're seeing, but. For us, that's where we've seen quite a bit of interest. Obviously, restaurant is a tough one, but I think that there is, especially with this whole COVID thing. But once we get kind of out of that, obviously, I think that's going to be continue to be strong. And in fact, we've got 2 restaurants here opening in the next 5 months in our center that we signed up pre-COVID that we're very excited about. And they're very excited about. So I think that those are still viable options. But obviously, the smaller spaces and the more, it seems to be obviously the retail is tough. It's going to be service based.
Mr. Foley.
Yeah, I'm glad that Jeff and Keiston had a chance to chime in first there, because I think they both have a macro view and certainly touch a much broader area with sort of the companies that they work for. And I agree with their comments on that, and they've got a better look into that than what I do. What I see that's interesting, at least in, well, 2 things. One, going back to the kind of the use streamlining, and let's look at this before COVID and just kind of think of the COVID timeframe here as a vacuum. Is we've always had strong interest from restaurants in downtown, and they'd never been provided a lot of opportunity. It was a timing issue, whether or not an existing restaurant was going to become available so they could move into town. That was a big roadblock for them. And now with the new policies, it seems like there's some more opportunities for these concepts to locate in the downtown, not necessarily branded concepts, but food is still very attractive to multi-generation and multicultural. So you've got a lot of demand for different people with different and exciting kind of new concepts that are now able to pick out where is their space most ideal out of a variety of spaces, not just something that was a pre-existing restaurant. So we're continuing to see that. emerge downtown. And I think it's exciting because if that becomes a big draw to get people back to, pound the pavement in downtown Los Gatos, it's going to help out, in the long term, kind of bring everything up and make the vision that we have a little bit more successful. So we're going to start to see more of that occurring. A little bit of it already has, and I think more is on the way. And it kind of slowed down a little bit, but to be honest, not that much. There's a lot of people out there looking to do new concepts, just being a lot more positive and bullish that we're going to, move through the pandemic and come out the other side safely. And I think I don't think that's any surprise to anybody, but something I'll add that's interesting that I see is more of a way things are changing is more like the home improvement showroom type businesses. We're seeing more of those with interest in downtown, and also having located a couple downtown. Like we've got the Villa Galleria, that's like a kind of a kitchen and tile, high-end kitchen and tile finishes showroom. We have the Shade Store downtown now. We've got a handful of these kind of home improvement style businesses that typically wouldn't locate in a downtown area. They would typically be more in an industrial area and maybe even in like a warehouse setting with a small showroom up front. But because retail is being impacted, there's now an opportunity for them to come into some of the spaces. And because of the way that people do shop and the way that they can deliver their product, or they don't necessarily have to have product on hand, it's becoming a really interesting shift to see, well, what's going to bring people down. You can order a dress or a shirt or whatever. It can come to your house. You can try it on. You can send it back. Like that, people have finally gotten used to that. But you're not going to order a sink or a piece of tile or whatever, or a cabinet. You can look at it online, but that's a pretty significant purchase. So now that they're coming in, they can touch it, they can feel it, they can get their hands on it. So I think it's something that, I'd like to see, welcome if it's done in the right way. And so far it seems to have done well with the ones that have been here now. But I think that's, for the area, it is a nice use to see coming in and filling for what people are going to do when they walk around town. So that's just something a little bit different that might be, more applicable to downtown, but certainly out in the other shopping centers, maybe we'll see a lot more of that happening as well, rather than, being out in more of an industrial area as we move forward.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, and then I'm going to go to the Vice Mayor.
Just wanted to echo, I agree with everything the other panelists said. It's definitely, services are, I think they were trending before COVID, of course, and it just exacerbated everything in terms of, the things that you can't do online. I agree with Jim. People are Amazon crazy now, and it really is interesting to see that shift, and anything in terms of streamlining CUP and all the things that we've been working, you guys have been working towards for a long time. It's made a huge difference. It really is. I think 5 years ago or so, when I started working in Los Gatos, there was quite a reputation of how hard it was, and you guys have made leaps and bounds. It really, you don't hear those kinds of complaints anymore. So just wanted to add that in.
Thank you. It's good to hear, because as we all know, policy takes some time before you see the consequences and the effects. So it's good to hear that. Thank you. Vice Mayor.
And my question is along that policy kind of line also. We've got a lot of rules and ordinances and policies that at one point, let me give an example. So you mentioned people are some crazy thing where you're doing drips or something, right? Well, that sounds like a medical use, and we might categorize it as a medical use. And we've made some rules that we don't want medical uses in this area. We made them because it was going to draw too much traffic or whatever the reason was. But now you've got these innovative uses that all of a sudden run into a rule that was really meant to stop something else, not stop this innovative use. And we've started in the last few years seeing these, and we're trying to fix some of them. And Jim knows really well to come to us and tell us, hey, this is a problem, and Monica does. But Cindy and Jeff and Keystone may not. So I first of all would encourage you to let us know when we've got an old archaic policy that's stopping an innovation, and what you'll probably get from our planning department is, sorry, that's not allowed. But we want to, if it's not making sense that it's not allowed, we want to go look at those policies. So I would ask right now, are you experiencing policies or ordinances that are inhibiting some of this innovation?
I can speak to that just briefly, and I think it mainly it works into some of the things I know you're working on. We had a tap room looking at one of our spaces recently, and there was some discussion about that, and Monica knows all about it because she helped work us through it. But it ended up not happening. But one of the hangups for them was food. And they were like, look, we are beer only, that we don't want to pretend to be something we're not, and we don't want to provide something that is going to tarnish our brand in some way, because this is what we do and this is what people want. And we're not open late. We're not going to be doing, the party thing and all that. These are our hours, but we don't want really to serve food. This food requirement seems kind of like, okay, it shouldn't be as intrusive as that. And I don't know all the history that why the rules were put in place, and I can't really speak to that with any education. I'm sure there were some very good reasons why they were, but that was one thing recently we were working through, trying to help them, because we really wanted them and saw them as a great opportunity. For reference, this was potential going into our Teals location, which would have been a great spot with a patio and some other spot across from Whole Foods there. So it would have created just some opportunity for community, and we envision music and some other things like that out in the patio. And but this food thing, we were working through it, but it actually ended up being a pretty big stumbling block at the time.
And I could give you a little history. I first started coming to Los Gatos in '92. Later, I bought a house here. But in the early '90s and mid '90s, it was really a party town where on a Thursday night you could wait 45 minutes outside to get into CB Hannigan's kind of thing. And we used to have cops walking the street once it started getting towards midnight and later, and it would spill into the neighborhoods. And we put in an ordinance before my time that said no more bars in Los Gatos, for example. And we removed that ordinance a couple years ago, and maybe we added the food thing at the time because we were trying to tiptoe into this idea that, yeah, it's okay to bring some bars, but we don't want to go back to this complete craziness like you'd find in a college town.
Yeah.
But we do welcome, what you're describing, but we still may need to tweak our ordinances a little bit to allow what you're describing. That doesn't sound like it's going to turn us into, a party town.
Exactly. No hard alcohol served. And I know what you're talking about. I was in high school in the 90s in Los Gatos, so I know exactly what's going on down there.
Thank you. And what would be helpful, I find during these study sessions, we can move things a little bit around, but I'd love it if Ms. Wren, if you could always give us what is the current status of things so that we all have the same understanding of the baseline conditions.
Sure, thank you. So in the instance that Mr. Smith is talking about, it was a discussion about not being able to use the streamlined process of going to the DRC. The group that was coming in would have had to go to the Planning Commission, would have had to go to the town council as their deciding body, which isn't bad in terms of going through Planning Commission and going through council. It's just a much longer and more expensive process. I think it's close to $16,000 just for that permit. And it's about a 6-month process. So when you're talking about the difference between that and something closer to, 5,000 or 6,000 to go to DRC, that's a big deterrent for someone coming in that's, looking to invest in our community. And so in this case, that was the instance that I think became a hurdle for the group. As you know, in our economic recovery agreement, we did adopt the ability for up to 5 markets or non-restaurants to use the DRC as their deciding body. And actually, this was one of the instances that actually kind of gave me the idea to bring that forward to you, because I thought, this is probably a great neighborhood serving use, much like a market, something that meets the needs, that fits. And so those are kind of the things that we have been bringing forward. And then just to take one step back in the terms of the medical use, the community development director, Mr. Polson, and I have been working together. We do have a very similar use that is coming into Los Gatos. And they were able to actually write a business description for us that really led to a personal service definition. And so we were able to help them come in under personal service rather than doing the medical office. So we have a little wiggle room in this policies that we have now, but as these changes come and as these evolutions happen, we will continue to work with you on those.
Okay. Councilmember Hudis.
Thank you. Really interested in the discussion, and I wanted to come back to some comments that were made earlier, and particularly Mr. Foley talked about some of the different kind of uses, such as showrooms and things like that, and it just triggered a thought about the shift that we're going through now. It's not only a challenge for retail because of the pandemic, but we've seen a swing, I believe, of about 30% more online retail during the last year. And that means that there's probably 30% less brick and mortar, Bradley Burns kind of retail. So what are the leading edge or innovative models that maybe we could think about trying to attract that are more of an offline online model, or something where we can participate in the online activity with the brick and mortar locations that we have? What kind of businesses are making that shift where people come and look in person and then do an online order, and how would we go about capturing some of that?
Mr. Smith, go ahead.
I just had a clarifying question on that. In terms of the town's goals regarding that initiative, can you enlighten me on how you envision a service like that enhancing the town?
Well,
Benefiting the town?
I'm not so much calling it an initiative, but I'm thinking is that retail was declining before the pandemic. It accelerated with a shift to a lot more people buying things online. So the question is, what are the kinds of businesses that we should be looking for? What are some more innovative business models that are occurring, and how can we get them into Los Gatos, where we're taking advantage of the terrific walkable environment in at least some of our shopping areas, and doing that in a way where the businesses that are coming in also have an online component.
So Mr. Smith, do you want to answer that after that?
Yeah, so I think my short answer would be that adjusting the policies is only part of the puzzle. That addresses the part of the hurdles as once the businesses get into the pipeline. But in terms of attracting the businesses, it's all about what the town has to offer in terms of attracting the public in general. What are the ingredients? What is it that makes the town special? What is it that makes the town unique? Those are the key things that if the town focuses on those things, some self-identity in that regard. The high school, I mean, look at the high school. There's no high school that looks like that anywhere in the United States. That's something to be proud of. Where are these structures and things that the town can identify themselves with, that not only creates culture, environment, and community. That's what draws the people and the businesses in. And then you have the policies in place to help the businesses to land themselves there once you've attracted them. I don't think you put a lot of policies in place and you're going to get a whole hodgepodge of mix and match and stuff, and we're all going to be going a bunch of different directions. But I think if you spend a lot of time focusing on what makes the town unique and special, then you're going to be surprised with how you attract businesses to come there.
Yeah, thanks. And I agree. We have a lot of character in various places, and I think maybe we've gotten away from that a little bit. But for instance, Old Town was one of the first repurposed facilities, and it's almost lost its identity as the school that it is, and there's the sense of place, and you're right. We have a tremendous amount of character in town.
Right.
Mr. Kreshik and then Mr. Foley.
So I agree with everything Keeson said about streamlining policy, but I'd like to offer a slightly contrarian view of what's happening in retail and what it means to something like the downtown. I don't think that this is an Amazon effect, so to speak, on retail. Retail is not dying because of Amazon. If you want my personal opinion, I find Amazon to be a fairly uninteresting, unexciting, unsatisfying experience. If you know exactly what you want, you need a screw, and your alternative is, I got to sit in traffic, I got to fight parking, I got to go to a hardware store where I can't find anybody, the person I find doesn't know what it is, why wouldn't I just order it and have it shipped to my house? The problem that's plaguing retail, or has plagued retail pre-COVID, is the retailer themselves. If you stop and look at a lot of the retail that's gone out of business, the bankruptcies, that's not because of COVID, and it isn't because of Amazon. It's because the retailers had lost their way. They stopped innovating, they stopped evolving, and they have been doing the same thing. And I won't name names, but you can think of any retailer that's gone bankrupt, and they are offering you the exact same experience in the store that you go into today that they offered you 25 years ago. So the customer evolved and the retailer didn't. So I think what you've got to do as far as retail, there's a lot of really great things that are happening. There's a lot of character in downtown, and there's a lot of opportunities, but change is hard and change is slow. You look at Old Town Center, and I don't disagree with you. It's lost its way a little bit. And I know there's a question coming up about lease terms, but you look at the side effects of having 10 and 20-year lease terms is, for 10 or 20 years, you can't really do anything to your space. And if you end up with a retailer that has become irrelevant, you're still stuck with them for several years. Then you look at that retailer from 20 years ago had a business model, whether it's square footage or size, merchandise, or how they interact with the customer, that's different from what the retailer wants today. I think there's an opportunity to attract a lot of these digitally native brands. And I think that every brand, there's a balance. There's not many brands that you find today that are 100% living offline or online without a presence on the other. Even Amazon, they've opened bookstores, grocery stores, Amazon 4-star on 4th Street in Berkeley. So there's examples where even the mighty Amazon, who is all online, is not. I think the one thing you have to really step back and think about, and I go to my opening comments, which is strategy. We work in a lot of downtowns, whether it's 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, or we at one point Hollywood Boulevard, 5th Street in San Diego. We've done a tremendous amount of street retail as an organization, and I have in my career. But the one universal challenge to street retail and downtowns is the fractionalized ownership. And what you really have to speak to with the retail community is a unified voice. And there are some really great uses, and you look at like the showrooms that Mr. Foley was talking about. Those are great uses, but they need to be positioned properly, because you put a showroom on either side of a restaurant. I don't know many people that go for kitchen cabinets or tile when they're going to dinner per se. That's usually more of a daytime activity, whereas a restaurant's more of a nighttime activity. So you need to put these pieces in the right place of the puzzle to really get the maximum benefit. Not saying they don't belong in the downtown, but there needs to be some sort of unified thinking as to what goes where and why. And that's very, very difficult to do in downtowns because you have 10, 20, 30, 40 owners who don't necessarily have the same objectives, don't necessarily have the same discipline, but you're asking them to all show the same discipline. So I think that there's still a lot of retail left to go, but I'd like to challenge the assumption that what's happening here is an online effect, and therefore we need to figure out how to capture the online dollars. But to specifically answer your question, I don't think the industry, the retail landlord part of the industry has figured out how to capture those dollars of, I saw it in the store, but I bought it online, but the attribution is to that store, therefore we should get some sort of piece of the sales. We have not been able to figure that out as an industry quite yet.
And before I go to Mr. Foley, Ms. Neese had her hand up, and it's usually a good idea to stop and pause when our town clerk needs us.
I did, Mayor. I just wanted to let you know that we had a slight glitch with the feed for KCAT, but we're back now.
Oh, okay, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Foley?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what I heard from both Keiston and Jeff, and don't want to repeat a lot of it, but offer just a couple of insights. I mean, I think that as Keiston was saying, creating this vibrant town or wherever it may be, if it's part of Old Town, if it's changing uses out at some of the lifestyle centers on the boulevard, whatever it is, I think we're to the point where we've taken a lot of steps to, I guess from a policy standpoint, become more welcoming. And we've taken a lot of red tape and it's kind of out of the way now. So I see more of the placemaking steps making a difference next. So whether that's festivals, just different types of things that are gonna become more attractive in town. We're bringing in some more of the entertainment type uses. That was a result of the streamlining. We discussed that. There's some other efforts that kind of need to put the cherry on top, so to speak, to really make it like an attractive place that has a meaningful increase in traffic. And then I think that, some of the retailers, I think what I heard Councilmember Gita asking is, what are the newer retailers? And I'm glad that, Jeff was able to kind of lend some insights, because I think he's got a bigger look into a wider portfolio across the country. And I don't know that there's anything so mind-boggling or unique out there, but there are a few things, and I'd hope that there's more coming. But something that I know is, let's just talk about some branded stores. They're mostly found in Santana Row and Valley Fair, right? And whoever is the kind of the cream of the crop that's doing the right thing, like Jeff was pointing out, that's being innovative. They may be a brand that's been around for a long time, but they're changing the way things happen and maybe the way people shop when they do come into a brick and mortar store. I have found some of those. One example from years ago was the Lucky Brand store, right, where you can buy jeans and whatever else. And they had adapted. They had the person that was helping me had an iPad, and it was like if something wasn't there, she was able to look it up and place the order and do this and that. And it was more of a technology forward experience. They did have a good amount of items there to kind of browse through. But those types of experiences, I think, are found in those companies. And those companies have made it fairly clear that Los Gatos is not a primary target for them. And maybe Jeff has more insight to this after, right? Because he has obviously brought some large branded retailers into Old Town over time, and maybe they're not as attracted to it anymore. I don't know, but I know that I've reached out for many spaces in the downtown area, and they don't seem to want to be here. And I think that's a big miss. And I don't know that we're going to be successful in changing their mind. But if we do create this environment that's special and unique, and we can prove it statistically with, more foot traffic or higher per square foot sales or whatever it might be, it's just part of the story that goes along with, well, there's a lot of Los Gatons that just aren't willing, or visitors that just aren't willing to drive down to a regional shopping center. And so if that's the case, we can recapture those dollars. We need to sell the story a little bit better. And as opposed to, years ago where it was no formula retail or whatever other barriers there were, or trying to attract one or two of them, simply removing that barrier, which we did, was not enough. So I think what we need to do is kind of take the other steps to create the environment, and then hope that we've kind of proven ourselves a little bit, differently, and then maybe we'll be successful in bringing some of those more forward-thinking, most likely more nationally branded hard good retailers back into town. And at that time, things have evolved again. Spaces are different sizes, different things have left. When years ago they may have wanted a 5,000 square foot space, they only need 2,000 now, and it's easier for them to find. So maybe this is wishful thinking, but I can see a path and an evolution of how we continue to drive the mix of uses that we have in town over time. But we've the paradigm shift has already occurred. It's more the entertainment, the place making, those types of things that we now know that those are coming, and we've cleared the path for them. And then hopefully they can drive the attraction for some of that other retail to begin to think that Los Gatos is relevant again. So I don't know if that helps frame it a little bit,
Yeah.
Council member. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're going through, a disruption right now, and it's an opportunity, to reboot, maybe in a little bit different direction, and to think about, as some of the ideas that were brought up right now, about really pushing those ideas so that when we come back up, we come back up in a big way.
Absolutely. And I saw Ms. Johnson, and then I'm going to go to Councilmember Badami, and then the Vice Mayor.
Just really quick in that vein, it's separate from the retail is the restaurant. And I know there is some, because of COVID, there was some outdoor dining expansion. Is it North Santa Cruz Boulevard that was allowed? Is there any thought towards making that more permanent, or encouraging those kinds of areas in downtown? Doesn't really mean much for our shopping centers where we are, but in terms of attracting people to downtown in general, and making that environmental loveliness shift again and specialness, seems like that's an opportunity.
Absolutely. And I'll look to Ms. Wren if you want to answer that. And that's a good segue into the conversation. One of the future questions is urban design, as we look at how do we make Parklet a permanent feature, or do we do a revised streetscape? But Ms. Wren, would you like to answer that?
Sure, thank you. So as a part of the council's actions at their last meeting in January, we did adopt a semi-permanent Parklet program where folks along North Santa Cruz Avenue can apply for a semi-permanent Parklet that becomes a little more permanent, a little more built out. We're looking to sunset the temporary K-rails that are out there and find something that's a little bit more conducive to the streetscape, which I know Ms. Zarnowitz will address in her conversation. And then to speak to the point of the private parking lots, we actually have adopted, as a part of the economic recovery resolution, the ability for our private lots to reduce their parking requirements and build some outdoor spaces. I believe that Keyston's working on that in their Silver Orchard space where Whole Foods is, and we have a couple other folks who are doing that. So at this point, the council has voted to continue it at least through the end of the year and possibly beyond that. So we are looking at how we can provide a level playing field. While we do understand that there's folks who target downtown, there's folks who target shopping centers, but as we extend opportunities for outdoor dining to downtown, we'd like to also have those in the private lot. So there are opportunities available. If you have clients in your shopping centers, or if you're listening to this conversation and you have some questions on that, please connect with me later this week or tomorrow, and I'm happy to work with each group individually.
Thank you. Councilmember Badami.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to go back to this jigsaw puzzle downtown. We've all raised some excellent points. And if we're looking for some type of unified vision downtown, I don't know how we're going to do that with the number of very small vacant retail spaces that we have. And there's a number of them. They're too small to convert to a bar or restaurant, which, by the way, I agree with Mr. Foley. We've done the reverse here, where people do come to maybe eat and drink rather than shop like they used to do. But what do we do with these very small spaces? Does anyone of the panelists have a vision for how we fill these spots? They're almost too small to have a showroom or bring back any type of specialized retail. They wouldn't be large enough for a chain store or for formula.
And Ms.
I'll leave that
Johnson, I
open.
see your hand up. Was that to answer, or was that from your prior question? Cindy?
Sorry. No, that was from my prior one. I didn't take the
Okay.
hand up. Sorry.
No worries. I see Mr. Foley.
Yeah, I mean, I see Jeff has his hand up too, and I want to hear more about what he has to say. I just wanted to offer Councilmember Badami that I think all the lease, I try to remind people the leasing takes a lot of time, and I don't think there's as much vacancy as what people think. I think that also what's happened is it's been prolonged because of the pandemic. Either there are things in negotiations in the works or whatever, those have kind of prolonged a little bit more too. So not that there's not an issue that you raised. I think there is an issue, and I think that I don't have the best answer to it. I think that there's kind of hopefully going to be a natural evolution of where we, as we come out, what we see the uses that are in demand. And I'm hoping that some services, some showrooms, some other things are going to come back and backfill some of those spaces. But just for kind of from my knowledge of what's occurring in the downtown, and maybe Jeff and Keyston and Cindy can share what they know about the other shopping centers. I don't think that there's as much real vacancy as what the perception is based on looking into empty spaces right now, if that's any comfort.
And Mr. Kreshik?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting question. We kind of operate off of a saying in our office, which is remain calm and stick to the plan, but you better have a plan. And what I think the challenge is to Mr. Foley's point, leasing takes a long time. If you walk down the street today, it doesn't feel as good as it once did. And unfortunately, perception can sometimes become people's reality, but there's probably a lot of deals that are in negotiations and in process that will fill some of those spaces. But the small spaces are actually, in my opinion, the most valuable right now. They're not valuable for conversion to restaurant, you're 100% right, or a showroom per se. But when you look at the chain stores of today or the formula retail, first of all, you have to sort of redefine what we've used as the traditional definition. So a chain store 10 years ago was somebody who had 600 locations. Today, a chain store might be somebody who has 20. A chain store was typically a big, almost category killer in some respects, you know, the one-stop shop for everything. And today, the chain, if you will, does what they do really, really well, but doesn't necessarily run out to, you know, to the whole world. So you can look at, I mean, how would you define something like a Warby Parker today, a Bonobos, things like that? Are those chains? Because they don't meet the traditional definition of a chain, yet they are in multiple markets, you know, multiple locations, and have quite a few stores. But what I think is really interesting is those brands are looking for those smaller spaces. They're looking for a way to engage with the customer, and they figured out how to do it where, you know, their traditional competitor from years ago would have taken 5,000 square feet to do it. They're doing it in 2. If their traditional competitor was doing it in 2, they're doing it in 1,000 square feet. So those small spaces are actually very valuable. But to me, it comes down to really 2 important things. And I think the town has done a fantastic job in streamlining the process and taking away some of the red tape. And you can't understate how important that is. But to me, it's, you got to know what you're going after. You have to know why you're going after something. You have to create a story. When we went after Sephora, we had a story as to why they were relevant to the town, and the town was relevant to them, and the customer was relevant. And unless you can put those 3 pieces to the story together, it's very hard to create a story of, well, I have a vacancy and you have a store. So we do talk in terms of, and I do think this is a nuance, but I think it's an important one. There's leasing and there's merchandising. Leasing is, you have a space, I have a use, we put them together and we go on to the next thing. Merchandising is, you have a space, I have a use. One of us isn't right for each other, so we should not go forward. and we should wait until the combination is right. What you really need is you need a merchandising eye. You need somebody to come in, an owner, what have you, and say, okay, this is what would be best for the entire street. This is what would be best for my building. And there's a little bit of game theory here. It's a question of, are you better off working together, or is everybody for themselves? And fortunately or unfortunately, in my career, I've had a lot of experience with this. Again, Hollywood Boulevard, Santa Monica on 3rd Street Promenade, where it is on the owners to sort of coalesce around a vision. Not everybody's going to do everything the right way. Not everybody's going to do everything that every other owner agrees with. And I don't think it needs to be where one owner is telling another owner what they should or shouldn't do with their building. But there should be some commonality of purpose and mindset and vision and direction. Or what we find is these streets really have a hard time getting off the launch pad. So I think the small spaces are actually very, very valuable today, more so than the large spaces. I'll be honest with you. I would rather have a 2,000 or 1,000 square foot space than a 9,000 square foot space all day long.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So what I think we're hearing is we're trying to have an exciting place and experiences for people to come to. And what I'm hearing is turnover is actually good. In retail, we're letting the new retailers come in and people go, oh, look, there's that new exciting store I heard about. Let's go to Los Gatos and see it. And the other 4 that also happen to move there. And so this reminds me of a conversation I had with Jim probably 4 years ago when we still had this 2021 ordinance that kept more restaurants from coming to town. And I remember Jim saying to me, we need to let these old restaurant styles or business models die. And he named a couple of them, and one of them is actually gone and still standing empty. I won't name them, what the targets were, but the idea I think was we didn't want the place to become Restaurant Row, but the restaurants weren't turning over. There wasn't any innovation. And it was getting stale. It seems like that's not a problem anymore, and we're not even talking about it. But I just wanted to bring it up, maybe for a short answer. Are we doing okay on the allowing the restaurant innovations to occur? And we got rid of that 2021 ordinance, and maybe that made the difference. And so the question is kind of targeted, Jim, but if the others have thoughts, I'd be interested also.
Mr. Foley, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. I think Councilmember Rennie, a lot has happened since then. Even pre-streamlining, I think it might have been longer ago than you recall. We had a lot of conversations about this for a long time, but the idea was not necessarily let them die, but let's force some competition into the system, because there was just not a lot of progress being made. And I think that started to happen bit by bit. I think that was healthy. And then I think throughout that same time, we started to see, impacts on retail. And then I think it really informed a lot of that streamlining process that occurred. So I think there was more than one factor in how things were going to evolve out of that. And I think some of the, some of it naturally occurred, and that's good and healthy. And in other ways, it motivated a lot of the other existing businesses to do things a little bit differently. And then finally, in the most recent phase where 2021 is gone, it's allowed for, like, a great example I like is Orin's Hummus. And I know I'm close to that one, but, we were able to bring in something that's really unique, something that's got regional recognition that never would have been able to occur before. It's very complementary. It's not necessarily competitive with other things that are in there. And I think it's providing an interesting new benefit. That was one of the more recent ones. And I think there's several on the way, some that I might be involved in, that I think are going to help, achieve the goal downtown over the next couple of years. And it's all, pursuant to the stage that was sort of set there. And I think that, not to harp on it, but this conversation is sort of the follow-up to the one that occurred that led to all of that. And now it's what's next. And I think we've had a really good amount of ideas and suggestions as to what's next. And I think we continue to let, your question, we continue to let that play out until such time that it's damaging in some way. And I don't foresee that occurring, but it's sometime if that becomes damaging in some way, we need to go and take a look at it. But so far, what I see, and I'd love to hear other opinion, is, we've got the North 40 out there with a whole kind of question mark as to what's going to happen, but it's going to have some interesting new stuff. We've got several representatives here from shopping centers on Los Gatos Boulevard, which is probably a whole other night of conversation as to what's going to occur, because I don't think we can cover it all here. But over time, there's really exciting things that are going to occur out there, and maybe there's some opinions on that. And then we go back into downtown and what's already starting to occur. The stage has been set for all of these things to hopefully pull together and round out Los Gatos as a whole. So I like where it's headed, and I think we're only going to continue to evolve in the right direction. So I wouldn't make any changes, and I think things have been happening, to answer your question.
That's a great segue into urban design. I know Ms. Zarnowitz is going to be doing a presentation on urban design, but before she does that, the question is, how do the current urban designs of a shopping district and future plan designs play into the conversation? I've been advocating for a while now that the Los Gatos Boulevard plan has to be revamped. My council colleagues know that. And I keep looking at how do we make that's integral in my mind to combine North 40 with downtown and have this holistic community feel. But we're also talking about a new streetscape downtown as well. And so how would this affect a business decision to locate if they knew that we were looking specifically at changes in our urban design and potentially a new landscape plan for Los Gatos Boulevard? And I'm looking at any of the panelists. Mr. Smith.
Sure. You start talking about Los Gatos Boulevard, and that's, Jeff in my backyard there. So that stuff, anything that happens along there in terms of improvement and capturing that area into a more holistic, like you're saying, view of Los Gatos is exciting for me. We've been advocates for that. Our organization's been advocates for that for quite a long period of time. And one question I would say is, in kind of doing some brainstorming, I saw this question on there, but I pushed. I wanted to just ask this question in the meeting here. What's the town's opinion of some of their sign ordinances? There's not a lot of signage that you've entered the town. And there's a lot of identity that goes with that. And so if you're driving along Los Gatos Boulevard, when do you enter Los Gatos and when are you in San Jose? I don't even know. And so I think that there might be something that could be looked at there that would start to kind of capture some of that perspective just from a visual traveling point of view. So that was just one thing that kind of came to mind. I thought I'd just raise my hand and say that. So that's it.
Thank you. And we're taking notes and adding that to our parking lot. So, Councilmember Badami. Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. Since we're talking about Los Gatos Boulevard, I'm excited about it. I think we're going to see some really exciting things out there. It's very ripe for development. But this question I might be more or less directed to Cindy Johnson, because I noticed that you were the construction manager for CVS new store build outs. And that CVS proposed site has been vacant for quite a long time. And that's a key spot on the boulevard. Do we have any idea what's going to happen there? Is CVS going to continue? Do you have a vision for what you might foresee if CVS is not going to go forward?
Well, so two things. I mean, I haven't worked for CVS for 6 years, and I was not the construction person on that in Los Gatos for CVS at the time. I know enough to be dangerous about the history there. I know it got completely killed because of the traffic impact fees. They were going to be, I don't know, like $1 million or something ridiculous. I am making that up, but it was crazy high. And frankly, CVS made a mistake buying the property before that was figured out. And that's the limit of my knowledge on that. As far as what they plan to do with it, I'm sorry, I have no idea. I think it would be wonderful, of course, for our shopping center if something happened with that property. But I've not heard anything about it lately.
What would you like to see there, being in close proximity to your property?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I'm more the construction arm than the development side, but you know, certainly anything, you know, as opposed to a vacant lot. You know, I know if I remember right, there's another business or, you know, property owner in between. I think when we first bought Los Gatos Village Square, we looked at any possibility of buying that property and expanding. And, you know, that included going all the way to CVS at some point, but, you know, that never went anywhere. And, you know, so first wish list is if we could expand, you know, if there was appetite for that from our investors, but really, you know, anything to enliven that boulevard is a good thing.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor and then Councilmember Risto.
And I'm glad we switched to the boulevard because I wanted to ask some questions about that too, sort of visions. You know, when I think about the boulevard, I think of it as a bunch of individual destination locations, right? Versus one mall. And, you know, I'm always the kind of guy that like to see sort of a park once and go lots of places kind of thing. And I don't perceive the boulevard, you know, as conducive to doing that. I know, like, I think I've gone to Whole Foods and didn't, you know, left my car there and walked across Blossom Hill to go to the CVS, yeah, that's there kind of thing, or you know, whatever I did. And it just felt really odd kind of crossing the street. I'm the only one doing it kind of thing. And should we keep it kind of as a bunch of individual destinations, or should we look for, I don't know, is it streetscape changes or something to create more of a holistic mall? Is it add a little shuttle to get people to ride? You know, do you have, you know, where should we take it? Should we try to make it more of one mall kind of thing, or not bother? And if we move it to one mall, how do we do that?
Mr. Kresher?
Yeah, I'm happy to just provide some opinion on this. I think it's a great long-term goal. I think it's very, very hard to execute. You know, our experience with shopping centers is they've been set up as individual destinations, sometimes with similar uses. You know, Whole Foods right across from Lenardi's. If you're a Lenardi shopper, you go to our center. If you're a Whole Foods shopper, you go to that center. The customer's very, very ingrained in that behavior. And what our experience has been with shuttles between projects and downtowns is the customer tends to be very wed to their own vehicle. I don't know how that is post-COVID. I would imagine even more so. But the notion of going to a shopping center and buying something and waiting for the shuttle to then go to the next stop, to the next stop, to the next stop, we haven't seen a tremendous amount of success with that. I do think having, you know, good streetscape certainly promotes at least a little bit more walkability and a little bit more comfort, but it can be a little bit of a black hole if you're not careful of. You could spend just millions and millions of dollars and still not ultimately achieve what you're trying to achieve, because again, the setup is meant for these to be sort of islands onto themselves.
Mr. Smith?
Right. Yeah, I agree with Jeff. That's how they're set up. I think I'd pose the question back to the town in general and say, what's the appetite for mixed use? Because that's a step in the right direction, if you ask me. So I spent, prior to joining the company, I was in the Pacific Northwest, building multifamily mixed use apartments where we had 1 to 2 floors of ground retail or commercial restaurant with apartments above, and 3 stories of or 4 stories of parking underground, and that was everywhere. And that's kind of my background and my experience. And I look around much of California and nobody does that. And I don't quite understand it, but you want a walkable nature where people can walk to their homes, go downstairs, grab a bite to eat, walk down the street, take the dog to the little, dog park and come back. That happens quite frequently up in the Pacific Northwest and in downtown Seattle and Bellevue and those areas. And it doesn't quite happen in the same way because people, it's not quite as tight here in California, I think. And but I think we're getting there. And I know that the town also has some pressures to increase housing. So that might be something to consider, what the zoning looks like for some of the mixed use, because that'll create some of the walkable nature you're talking about.
And could I just follow on? Can you expand on that a little bit? So we do have a general plan update that I see several of the members now have their hand up, where we're talking about exactly that. But what else beyond zoning, what else do we need to do to enable that?
Height restrictions.
I'll let others ask questions. I bet they have some good ones.
I was building 5/3s all the time. And that was some of those, that was of course downtown, or not even always downtown, some just outside, but you gotta have folks be okay with going up.
Yeah. And Vice Mayor, I saw the same thing where immediately hands went up. So Mr. Foley and Ms. Johnson, if it's okay, I'm going to see if any of our planning commissioners and Councilmember Risto, I'll start with you. If they're specific on this conversation before we switch questions.
Right, thank you. I was heading in the direction that I think leads into mixed use. I wanted to ask the representatives here that have essentially the shopping centers, chicken and egg. We are, as a community, wanting to move more toward pedestrian and bike access. And so as we're trying to promote that, I'm looking not so much, as the Vice Mayor said, for a park once solution, but leave the car in the driveway solution, and looking at the shopping centers as neighborhood serving for walking and biking, and looking toward a general friendliness toward that. And because these shopping centers were built, obviously, to make it easy to get in and out in a car, to park a car, how does a shift in the town's direction, as we are looking at mixed use in the general plan, as we are wanting to get more toward biking and walking, that is a little bit inhibited by the design of the shopping center. How does the shopping center evolve? How does that change what kind of tenants you've had, and the relationship with the town as we move forward with this vision?
Right. And I see 3 panelists up, so I'm going to start with Ms. Johnson.
Well, I just wanted to, first of all, to Keaston's point and the mixed use, before CVS, I was with Shea Properties, and we did the first mixed use project in Dublin. That's exactly what he was talking about. It was apartments over retail, but also next to a grocery anchored, or part of a grocery anchored shopping center. And I can tell you, Donahue Schreiber, who's never done any residential, and ironically, I'm up in the Pacific Northwest now doing both territories, but we're absolutely looking at that in lots of shopping centers here, where we have some development opportunities, and that's what we're considering, is partnering with housing developers, because that's what a lot of cities are doing. Specific to Los Gatos and Los Gatos Boulevard, I also agree with, I think what Jeff was saying is it's very hard to get, just like you were talking about with downtown with multiple owners and, multiple goals and restrictions. It's very hard to get everything completely in sync for a completely different shift in, I don't know what that feedback is, sorry. To answer the question on how does an existing center change, it's going to be difficult unless there is at least in my mind, unless there is a development opportunity or a redevelopment opportunity such as that the whole game of rules changes where you're allowed to and the height is absolutely the big thing. That's usually what stops us.
Thank you. Mr. Foley?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, everybody gets to talk about their projects, so I get to talk about mine now. As recently as 3 years ago, I was managing a project in Milpitas, 1,200 multifamily units and 150,000 square feet of retail and a 200-key hotel in 5 buildings out where the new BART station is. And so, Keith, I don't think you were thinking exactly about it, but there is stuff happening out there. And I know Jeff is involved with a massive multifamily project that's just down the way from us. It's been wildly successful with a lot of, 5/2 and stuff like that. But not to bully you, but I think that's kind of some of the product type that we're going to see kind of evaluated through this general plan. I don't. It's a general plan for a reason, right? It's 30 years long, or what are we, 20-year long general plan or whatever it is for this time. It's going to have to evolve over time. I don't know that we're going to get to those heights. I think height is important if it's looked at in a responsible manner. Obviously, Los Gatos in the history here is very particular about height limits and view corridors and the hillsides. So, but I think something that's critical in this general plan, and I think I've made some comments about it, is to look hard at FAR. So, I don't think those are mutually exclusive, but, there does need to be an appropriate FAR available to be able to achieve what the town is looking to do, to meet the housing element and to bring that kind of product into town. And from what I've seen in some of the drafts, I'm not sure that it's there. It's going to be a combination of, FAR, height, and just how you guys are going to put that zoning in place out there. And it's got to, construction's expensive, and it hasn't really gotten less expensive in any meaningful way over the past, 5 years or so. So in order to justify projects, if that's what you're really looking to have happen, you really have to create an opportunity for developers to be able to justify the expense of building what the vision is that you're putting forth in that general plan. So I think the question originated with, well, when you've got a lot of different ownerships, it's almost like the same question that you asked about downtown. You have all these separate little small ownerships, and how do we create that vision? And Jeff has some experience in getting neighbors and neighborhoods together and things like that. Well, this is the same thing on just a large, just larger lot sizes, different various property owners up and down the boulevard. The general plan really puts forth what the vision is supposed to be there as you guys move through that process. And it's not going to be perfect. It won't all unfold in a development, that you can kind of control and phase over time. You guys have to kind of put together, I think, your best shot, your best effort, and then rely on the market and the property owners and the developers and everybody to come in. And I think they will. There's an appetite for that in the West Valley. The value is going to be high in the end. So I think it's headed in the right direction. I take a few of those things under consideration. We are looking at how the general plan is going. But I don't know. I wouldn't think that it's absolutely necessary to create some sort of, continue, like you're going to end up having pockets, and that's probably a good thing. You're going to have staggered height limits. You're going to have some projects that are, I guess, on a less massive scale than some of the things that we described that we'd work on either in the upper Northwest or downtown or wherever it might be. And then you'll still have, some open spaces and things in between. And if that's planned for properly, I don't think that it creates an a negative feeling on Los Gatos Boulevard. It doesn't need to be that you're walking all along and you can walk up and down, walk down all 5 blocks or through 5 major intersections there and be able to walk from A to Z. You can, you know, go to one part of it one day, leave the car, whatever it is, and then maybe you go to another one and there's some transit there that assists you to do that, or you go to a different one a different day. And I think it really can create a unique experience out there that will be the major connector between, you know, the North 40 development that is really more like what we were just talking about in the projects that we had all described, and then through the boulevard and then down into downtown. And I know this is not something that is just in my head, it's in everybody's head that's working on this, but I think it's headed in the right direction.
Thank you. Chair Jan Alpha.
Thank you. I'm just so excited to hear the conversation shift to mixed use because it's a huge topic for us on the General Plan Advisory Committee. And I'd really love to get more specifics from the developers on, you know, height. Is height the key thing, or are there other things that we can do to attract mixed use developers? And one thing I'd like to point out is we've got in the general plan several areas of opportunity, we call them, that are sprinkled about town. We're not focusing only on Los Gatos Boulevard, but there are areas that would perhaps be more conducive to greater heights because they aren't obstructing those view corridors that we hold pretty dear to our hearts. So I would love to hear more about what other constraints we should be looking at, because we are looking to increase pretty dramatically the number of housing units available. We're looking at smaller units, higher density and that sort of thing. And I'm seeing Mr. Foley's head nodding. That's encouraging. You know, give us some feedback. Are we, you know, where might we add some framework around the mixed use development that will help to encourage the development, even if it could, in some cases it could go higher, in some cases maybe not. But how do we make it happen in either case? And last, we are looking to redevelop certain areas of town that are anchored currently by a neighborhood serving grocery store and small shopping center, as opposed to wholesale, you know, ground up, nothing exists on these parcels. So, you know, if you could just talk a little bit more if there's time, and if not, maybe we can bring it back for specific questions to the general plan process.
Would anyone like to take that?
Well, I'll just venture to say, I don't know, I mean, having not been through the town with such a venture, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with any developer that has brought something to the table that has been denied for a specific reason. So I know heights are an issue, I know traffic patterns are an issue, utilities, all that kind of thing. But I don't know what, and I know that the, you know, existing plan doesn't allow for much of that, but I don't know. So I can't speak to exactly what other developers may have been hung up on within the process. And so I'm just kind of curious if anybody else has some of that insight, you know, from the town knowledge.
And as we post these questions, again, if thoughts come to you beyond tonight, please, as I think the Vice Mayor said, we want you to share your knowledge. And if there are specifics that we need to know about, I think we want to make sure that you have our number and no, we are open to listening. Commissioner Thomas. So.
Thank you. I did have a follow-up question related to something that Councilmember Risto mentioned about just getting people to leave their cars at home. And it is just what are some specific things that we can, what are some specific things that we can do to help people get out of their cars and or leave their cars at home? Living near downtown and a walkable distance from downtown is very desirable, as we all know. And so how can we, as the boulevard develops, as North 40 develops, what are things that like we can specifically do to help you all get people to leave their cars at home and walk to shopping centers or bike to shopping centers?
since we're all sort of staring at each other, nobody seems to want to take this one. I don't really have a good answer for you. People are creatures of habit. They like their cars. I don't know that there's anything specific we have as a strategy to get people to leave their cars at home. I do think this goes back to the walkability, and the more units you have within proximity, without destroying view corridors or the charm of the town itself, or overburdening the infrastructure. But I wish I had some sort of silver bullet I could give you that said this is how you get people out of your cars. I think I've been wrestling with that question for the better part of my entire career, and I still have no good answer to it.
Well, and I raised my hand just as Jeff started talking, and I was going to say pretty much the same thing. If we had that answer, we'd have magic bullets a lot of places. You can talk about bike lanes, you can talk about bike storage. Certainly any beautification that includes sidewalks that are more walkable and less damaged and things like that certainly helps. But other than that, especially speaking from a developer that has two grocery anchored, people need their cars in a lot of cases to put the things they buy into the cars. So it's hard to say for a lot of those trips that they're going to get unmarried to that.
And what I'd love to do, I see several hands up. We've been talking quite a bit about urban design, and if it's okay with Vice Mayor and Commissioner Hansen, I'd love to let Ms. Zarnowitz give her presentation on urban design to help feed the conversation, and then I will definitely go back to both of you, unless your questions were very specific to this conversation.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit, if I could, Mayor.
Sure.
The height question, I know people were hesitant, but I was hoping to get a little better feel for, probably from Keaston maybe, what height is really needed to pencil out, because a 5/3 there's no way in heck that we're gonna get that. I mean, we fought over a 35-foot height limit in the North 40 that sits in a frigging hole, right? And, maybe you can get 3/1 does that pencil out? And then maybe you've got to stick parking underground, and does that get it too expensive? So it's, for experienced developers, those of us trying to make these rules, we don't have a good sense for what can pencil out with today's construction cost. You're talking about going all the way up to the point you have to start using steel and then you stop, right? Can we get anywhere below that and make it economically viable?
I haven't done a study in California or here, but I can tell you, yeah, it's pretty tough, right? I mean, like Jeff was saying, or maybe it was Jim, construction costs are astronomical. We're doing a rehab right now on some apartments we own in San Jose, and it's just it's surprising to me that some of the rehab we're doing, the units the building, it's 182 units, and it's costing somewhere in the neighborhood of slightly less than what it cost to build it 15 years ago to do a rehab. So it's staggering. And I think where the developers, you entice them is they have to be able to have the bang for the buck, and you have to be able to have enough units there to justify the cost of the land. And then if they go in and they dig a hole, then that's expensive too. So yeah, I mean, the best way for them is to get as much height without going steel as they can.
And then Commissioner Hansen, did you have a question specific to this?
Yes, I did. And so I do want to hear what Ms. Hurwitz was talking about, but we did, I chair the General Plan Update Advisory Committee, and we've been working on this, and this question about the mixed use is very, very important to us, because that is one of the key vehicles we're looking for growth. And so one of my questions was what the Vice Mayor just asked about, what does the height really need to be? Because right now we have 45 feet in the mixed use general plan designation. And is that enough? Because for us to go through all the way through this process, you know, and not really have a good handle on that, is kind of a problem. And then secondly, we had the more other question I had was about parking. We actually had testimony in one of our meetings that parking requirements were an impediment to doing mixed use. And if you're going to have more density, you obviously do need some parking. So do you share that perspective that we're going to need to be more relaxed on parking requirements in order to make mixed use happen because of the cost of constructing parking garages?
Mr. Foley.
These are all excellent questions. And I know you guys spend a lot of time week after week and meeting after meeting going through them. And, you know, I don't have a full mastery of all the materials you've been provided and what you guys have been looking at. And I would hope that the consultant, you know, can provide a lot of guidance there. But just from a high level and what, you know, I heard Keaston say and some of the other, you know, panelists, and just knowing what Los Gatos is like and knowing what Councilmember Rennie said, I mean, no, there's no way it's going to be, you know, the 5/3. So what can you create within the constraints, within the setbacks, within the open space requirements, and assuming that you're probably going underground, and how high can it be? I mean, the biggest one, and how many units can you get to deliver, and how much do you want, and can you limit parking? I mean, these are all really good questions. Can we kind of put the formula together right now? I don't think so. I think that if there's more feedback, we can come to your other meetings and help with that or take some of it offline. But the one thing that I'll just point out again that I've been looking at with clients, both in downtown and on Los Gatos Boulevard is the FAR. So if you're looking at, you know, trying to, if you can't with the FARs that I've seen suggested, and again, I admit I haven't looked at the most recent draft of it. It doesn't look like you're going to be able to go anywhere near these heights of 45 feet or whatever it is, because you're already limited with your floor area ratio that's associated with that. So I still think that needs to increase. And I still think that there's a way to request for the consultant to make sure that all the constraints are applied such that you don't just get a big square block building, and that you do preserve some open space and some view and kind of force a creative design. And then you just have to presuppose that that's going to be subterranean parking. It's going to be expensive. And so you got to kind of figure out working within that and, you know, within the 35 or the 45 feet or whatever you think is reasonably going to be approved and achievable, you know, where can you get? And I think you got to push the floor area ratio up to achieve what you guys are looking for. And that's just really, you know, without having a lot of the information to kind of crunch and, you know, something that I think is high level where your consultants or someone else might be able to look at that a little bit with a little bit more detail and provide more options. And then maybe you take those, and I know you have a lot of, you know, really well-qualified people in the committee, but maybe there does need to be an outreach to the development community to say, well, look, if we were able to do this, you know, does this work? You know, can you help us? Or is it something that you wouldn't be able to, you know, even participate in because of, you know, what we've designed? And maybe you are doing that. I'm not aware. But that would be, you know, a suggestion to try to get them involved. So when we did the specific plan for the North 40, there was someone there that you could engage. There was a potential, even though they didn't have a project and it was a specific plan level, there was a developer involved where you could discuss and ask them what was feasible. So, you know, to the extent this is a similar venture, you just need to reach out to maybe multiple different ones and get more feedback from the community at large and have them inform the process.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Arnowitz.
Good evening.
Welcome.
So you can hear me all right, I guess. And I think Mr. Andrews has a PowerPoint to put up. I want to, again, thank you for the opportunity this evening to talk about this and also acknowledge the work of our planners that went into help preparing the presentation for the discussion, Aaron Walters and also Ryan Safdie and Sean Mullen. So if we could go to the next slide, please. One second. So we're talking here about urban design in downtown areas. And when we talk about that, we're not just talking about the downtown, but again, what you've been discussing this evening, multinodal commercial centers throughout a city or a town. And these really are the centers, the working hearts of our communities, the places anyone can meet, we can find what we need, goods, services, activity, even company. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so, you know, just the basics of urban design, what makes a place? Well, we start from a distance, we look at the profile of a town. What's the overall shape? What defines the scale of a block and against the California foothills on the horizon, in this case, as you approach, for instance, Sonoma. And we think about how 19th century surveys laid out public streets around plazas connected by paseos and alleys. Next slide, please. And then coming down to the street level, streets evolved to meet programmatic functional needs, transportation, accessibility, sanitation, government and public services, and the public right-of-way, which is the combined sidewalk and street width from building face to building face, can ebb and flow over time to adjust for the different modes of transportation or even sidewalk designs. Building walls of varied widths and heights frame the commercial street, creating a somewhat enclosed space that we experience. And at the pedestrian level, storefronts with a variety of dimensions, materials, architectural details make up the rhythm of the backdrop that evolves through the centuries. These blocks carry forward our experiences and our memories, and this is the historic character that is so important. And the character in general, if we're talking about the wider town, and that it is fair to say that Los Gatos has retained. Next slide, please. And then coming into the entry level, the entries that punctuate the storefronts, various dimensions, various styles. They catch our eyes. They draw us in. Again, I think we've heard some of that this evening. Downtowns, commercial areas are flexible. They need to be flexible. I can't say enough about how important this is. Storefront and entry pieces can be pulled in and out and should be allowed to be pulled in and out, like signage can be, or planters, landscaping, paint, anything like that, to accommodate different users. Next. Also opportunities, looking for opportunities within a town or a city as it grows are very important. So within the datum of infill on a street, it's also important to allow and create room for unexpected discoveries. Again, these are the things that make a place. It may be just ahead that you come upon a very important landmark that has a broader setback and a bigger setting that it can accommodate. Or just around the corner, you might see an opening, a paseo that can provide discovered connections. Next, please. And so zooming in kind of on Los Gatos, I just give a brief, and I promise, very brief history, but when we look at towns and cities, we look at their development patterns. How did they develop? Very common to the state of California. So I would just start that when we talk about a California town, I always like to start with former state librarian Kevin Starr's quote and his context that he puts to where we live. And he says that, quote, at the time of initial European contact, more than 25 generations of Native Americans had lived harmoniously in their own cherished places under the terms of the cultures they had evolved. It's just important to note that, obviously, as our history. After contact in Los Gatos as a California town in the foothills on the edge of the vast Santa Clara Valley, following the establishment of the woolen mills, which you all know, on the east side of the stream, lumber industries and Santa Cruz Turnpike, it really was with the railroad that the town crossed the stream to connect its development patterns and the fruits of its horticulture to points beyond. And so with the plaza at the crossroads of Santa Cruz and Maine, the commercial development framed not broad urban boulevards, such as the Embarcadero in San Francisco or Paris. Rather, they framed walkable, narrow streets with varied, dense, low-rise buildings. And the commercial downtown commercial historic district recognizes this intact collection of buildings from this era. Next. And again, as we've heard tonight, downtowns, commercial areas evolve. Each generation of users stewards the street forward, even as needs and demands, what provides activity and support and design, composition, sensibilities, materials, construction technologies, all change over time. Like architecture, activities are eclectic and can sometimes revive the old, like making or crafting, and other times allow for the new, like merging technology and fitness. Next. And in urban design, while key infill pieces of the backdrop, like for instance the historic Montebello building, are important, so are unique one-offs such as plazas with landscape features in new developments. It's also worthwhile, I'll put a note in here, to think ahead to what is and what will be meaningful to new generations. Because it's said that with the perspective of time, the current generation will cherish their grandmother's wedding dress. They have 50 years to look back on that. But we need to think about that going forward. And we're seeing the 50 years shortened to really 30 years, given the pace of the times we live in. Next. So when needs arise, such as now, where, for instance, there's much more of a demand for open air activity, outdoor cafes obviously activate private open space areas. They're often adjacent to the public right of way or to the street, and they feel like part of that space, but they are on private property. And they can stay in their, they can live on long term. Next. And then, but sidewalk cafes can also be right up against the building facade, right? The storefronts. And again, typically we see that kind of a sidewalk cafe lining a boulevard. They can also be more or less defined depending on the uses. They can be short or long-term. Next. So parklets have been introduced, and they've introduced the idea of expanding the public realm by tucking into parking spaces for more defined either a park or an outdoor commercial use, such as a cafe. They can be temporary or they can be semi-permanent. Typically, again, we see them on lower speed streets that are narrower. The figure ground sketch on the right here, it highlights in green open spaces within the downtown area, and then also pops in orange the parklets that have already, these semi-permanent parklets that have already been provided. And obviously this example here. Next. Part of the important recovery that we've had responding to COVID and COVID mitigation measures has been to provide these temporary parklets, but they do have some limitations. The K-rail provides the hard edge from the street, which is great, but the change of grade from the sidewalk still exists. And if we think about historically, shopkeepers used to raise and lower awnings to control shade. These tents and other opaque structures are not as adjustable, and they can look more like a structure and block storefronts and block, bustling sidewalks and commercial areas. Next. So what are the key elements of a successful semi-permanent parklet design? I think we've touched on some of them. The engineered edges, again, planters and railings that provide protection between the street and the parklet are key, as well as platforms that are accessible from the sidewalk with movable seating that is also flexible and accessible. Next. And then shade devices, obviously to protect from the sun. They also add a pop of color without blocking a streetscape or a center. They are adjustable, and again, like window dressings in a storefront, they're flexible. I'll try not to say that word again. Okay, next. And as seen in these examples, the open steel frames, which can have strings of lights, they define the parklet space without closing off the sidewalk or the storefronts. Next. So semi-permanent parklets can bridge the gap. They can bridge the gap to longer-term urban design programs. And like storefronts, awnings, signage elements, these pieces can be pulled in and out against the bustling backdrop of the streetscape. Pops of color stand out above the neutral landscape base. Next. Under open frames, which can carry lights that shimmer in the evening against the town's profile in the California hills. Next. So in closing, I just want to note that well-designed parklets can work to achieve several goals. They can retain character, which is rooted in a place. They can create vibrant outdoor spaces by extending the public realm and enhance the storefronts that make up the fabric of the street, all the while providing access to activity and inclusivity for everyone. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zarnowitz. And I have to say, thank you for that reminder of how beautiful our town really is.
It really is.
It really is. And I know that was one of the questions we were asking is how do we, what features do we bring to the business community? And that natural beauty that we have within our town is immediately there. So thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, it does. The pictures made it look quite beautiful. And it tells me, yeah, we were on the right track with the parklets, but I don't feel like we're done, right? What else do we need to do? I don't think that presentation addressed that very much. One of the things that we keep talking about is we need to create experiences for people to come downtown. And maybe the high level question is, should the town just be enabling the businesses and the landowners to create the experiences, or should we be helping to create the experiences? And the first things that just pop in my mind, should we have a space where a street performer can set up if he wants to, or a little 2-person band or something like that, right? That would be the town providing a space to enable an experience. If let's say that's an experience we want to have. And there's been questions about all the planters. Are those adding a value anymore, for example? Should we get rid of the planters? Should we have more seating that's available to the public kind of thing? There's some of these other questions, but, I think we need to think, I'd like a little more feedback on, particularly the thing about creating experiences. Are there things that the town could do to help create the experience to come downtown?
Mr. Kreshik?
Yeah, I think when it comes to creating the experience, one thing you can never underestimate, and I think the town of Los Gatos does a great job, is safe and clean. You have to make sure that your streets stay safe and clean. If you look at some of the things that are happening on other great streets throughout the country that are in decline, safety, security, cleanliness is probably the #1 item. As far as other things you can do, I think it's a much bigger conversation. There's not one thing, if you do X, you'll get Y result. I think you have to have a comprehensive plan. It's not street performers plus planners equals success. I think you really have to think through the ramifications of all of it. You look at some of the street performers on other streets, and again, I do quite a bit of work on 3rd Street Promenade. You can make an argument that they're an enhancement. I would probably tell you that there's a whole bunch of issues that go with that make it a nuisance. And it's not conducive to business. So It's a very, very complicated question. I think the most important thing is safe and clean messaging. And then from there, it really goes to the owners having that common vision, because the collection of uses that are on the street will help create those memories and those experiences that get people to want to come back down here. There's a whole layer of other things you can do, but again, it's a very, very complicated question.
Thank you. Councilmember Risto.
Thank you. I also really appreciated the presentation, Sally. And, you know, as somebody who walks downtown a lot, we do have an absolutely beautiful town. I love the parklets. I think what's important when we're talking about streetscape is that the town and the council has had a vision toward, you know, moving toward a more people-oriented streetscape. And before COVID, the parklets that were shown are called temporary parklets. It was kind of a couple-year pilot program. And then when COVID hit, we've got really temporary parklets with the K-rail, which I think are essential for the short term, obviously not the most attractive long-term, and we've got the grade issues. But what I'm thinking about is prior to COVID, there was a vision that the parklets that were going in that are very beautiful, but temporary, were kind of temporary because there was a vision of redoing the entire streetscape downtown. And the practical side of me says with COVID now, we can't really say in any kind of short-term horizon that we're going to blow out downtown, redo the sidewalks, put the dining against the buildings, push the sidewalks out. So I'm looking toward what is the best way we can make the best use of what we have existing. And, you know, in my mind, that would go toward the parklet, the more permanent looking parklets being permanent, at least in terms of, you know, the next 5 to 10 years or whatever we can envision. And so how do we move forward there? And if we are going to keep that kind of dining at the curbside, I'm saying a lot, but I know from the parking study, we know that we really don't need street parking on Santa Cruz Avenue. And I actually think any kind of street parking really clutters it up if we're going to move toward parklets and more dynamic use. And so I would love to be looking at, you know, how do we come up with a plan to define where are going to be the rideshare drop-offs? How many do we need downtown? Where are we going to have loading zones? And how can we eliminate any kind of other car parking on Santa Cruz and potentially Main and push people into the parking lots? The other thing would be knowing that we're going to have these parklets along here, our sidewalks do feel cluttered. We had benches and planters that made sense when that was what we were doing with the sidewalk, but now they feel like an impediment. And so I don't know that we could actually remove all the planters, but can we talk about getting rid of the railings on there, because they aren't even seating areas with those little rails on there. But I would love to see options for a phased movement toward a more open sidewalk, toward more of the parklets, toward moving the cars, and just have that vision. And then what is absolutely necessary to get people here by rideshare, to make sure that stores that don't have access on the backside have loading, and how do we move there? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Town Manager Pravetti.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge the work that the council did in January to some of the points that Councilmember Risto raised. As mentioned and directed by the council, we have set up a grant program to incentivize more of the semi-permanent parklets to be built, because we really do think that there's some value to do this. And I think that's a big step towards the phased improvement of the downtown. And so those members who are watching us tonight can contact Monica Wren for more information about that program. And then I do want to comment on the rideshare parking and short-term loading, because as part of the K-Rail project, we were actually directed to essentially eliminate most of the on-street parking, and any parking that remains was intended for that quick turn. And so I know Matt Morley has joined us this evening, but there are places, I believe pretty much every block face has at least one short-term parking space. We may not use the words rideshare or Uber or whatever, but essentially it could function in multiple ways. So let me, if I may, Mayor, just ask Matt to give us a little bit of preview of where we are implementing the parking study and how this evolution is continuing as we continue our recovery from the pandemic. Thank you.
Good evening, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. And I do have a big, long list of items about the downtown and phasing and all of that, and I'll spare you the details on that for the interest of time tonight and just capture a couple of specific items. With respect to parking and the parklets and the parking study did envision sort of removing all parking along North Santa Cruz. And with that, we do end up significantly impacting the parking lot. So we hit that magic 85% number at that point. And that includes having preceded the removal of parking on North Santa Cruz with some other elements of the parking study, including looking at moving some of the putting an employee permit parking plan in place, which we're working on with the police department. But also putting some of that parking in some of the neighborhoods, which is a conversation that we'll need to have with the council at some point to take advantage of some of the underutilized spaces on neighborhood streets that creates that capacity that leaves us some room in the lots. We don't have an issue right now. The parking lots have plenty of capacity today. But we're all expecting and hoping for a return to something beyond what we had with pre-COVID. And I think, as we've seen the activities every time the restrictions are changed with COVID, people flock to the downtown. So folks are ready to come out and come downtown. I think we'll see that in a big way in the future. We just need to be careful that we're not out ahead of ourselves, removing all of the parking and creating an issue before we want that issue, before we're prepared for it. With that, we do have, we've switched our parking, not 100%, but a significant amount along North Santa Cruz to a green parking zone, a 30-minute parking zone that encourages that quick churn, allows people to stop and go in and pick up their meal or dart into the store to pick something up, the cleaners or what have you, and then get back out and move along with the idea of having the longer term parking in the parking lots. Some of the other challenges we see are sort of our wayfinding, and we need to solidify a wayfinding program, which means signage, and look at what does our signage look like in the downtown, and where do we have too much, and how do we manage that? So there's a series of conversations, and you can see how they start to layer on one another and create more and more work plans on top of each other. And the semi-permanent parklets are another element that, I think looking at them as a 10-year, I'd say a 5 to 7 year time frame. At 7 years, I think they're going to start to look a little tired. And so that in my mind is our vision point of okay, what happens after year 7? Certainly bringing businesses in to talk about a streetscape plan today after they're coming back from COVID is probably not realistic. Let's give them a year to recover and get their feet back under them. But at that point, we need to understand what's going to happen at year 7. We've got great plans for addressing it immediately with the work that Laurel talked about, that the council has directed us to do with helping to fund some of the costs of the semi-permanent parklets. I think they provide a nice look on the intermediate term, but longer term, I think we need a vision for what the downtown is going to look like. And some of the other thoughts that have come into my mind, at some point we have utility infrastructure underground that is going to impact these parklets, these semi-permanent parklets. And it's going to be a bummer of a day when we have to go to a business and say, hey, we have to rip up your parklet because the gas line or water line or sewer line needs to be replaced. And that's going to be a hard conversation to have. And that's not new infrastructure under the street there. So that day is imminent. So we're also going to have to pave the street at some point, and that paves right up against the park. So there's all kinds of elements that we have to consider. We've talked about taking out planters. And so if we start taking out planters and doing infrastructure changes, where does that start and stop? And how much investment do we do now versus how much do we plan for and vision for and incorporate into a longer term vision. So all thoughts that with many more layers, and I'll stop there and turn it back to you all.
Thank you, Director Morley. And as we said, these are all seeds, food for thought. And as we work towards our work plans for the year, these will be overlays of already a well-defined work plan. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to throw in another seed that's probably, it's not, I don't think it's a new idea. You know, people have talked about wanting to have Los Gatos Boulevard to be a pedestrian mall. And we know that even with the one-way traffic, that didn't work because it overloads the neighborhood streets. But, you know, I've thought about a little bit the European model where, you know, like the last place I saw it, I think was Ascona, Switzerland. They have, you know, an area where they have these retractable bollards that, imagine in Los Gatos at 7 o'clock, the bollards come up and you can no longer get onto Santa Cruz Avenue. And and then it becomes a pedestrian mall, and it doesn't cost us a fortune to, you know, have our staff come out and block off the street and so forth. It just takes a little bit of capital investment. And so it gets past the cost problem once you do the capital investment. And I think it gets past, if you do it like at 7 o'clock, say, it gets, I think you know, one of the problems is the high school traffic, right? If we block Santa Cruz, even one lane, as soon as the high school's in session, it's a nightmare for university. So, and then as people are coming home from work, so if you're around 7 o'clock, you might be at the point that there isn't that much overflow of traffic outside of Santa Cruz. So the real question is, if we did something like that, is it worthwhile to just have a pedestrian mall starting at 7 o'clock at night, for example?
Question, and I'm looking at any panelists who want to respond to that, or if that just wants to sit and marinate in our minds for a while.
If nobody's really excited about it, then we don't need to go any further with it. That's because there are problems with this idea, but people keep bringing it up, and that's why I'm testing to see if there's any excitement with just a later an evening kind of closure.
Yeah. Mr. Foley?
I don't know if I'll want to answer that directly, Councilmember Rennie, but I think, what you're talking about is trying something out. And at the Chamber, we've talked about a lot of different things. And maybe this answers some of the other questions that were raised earlier about, what is next and how do we create this place and where does the investment come from? And I think that, and who does it? Right. I mean, that's always a huge question. Is it the town taking the lead? Is it the economic vitality? Is it the Chamber of Commerce? Is it one business or more businesses getting together? And where does the funding come from? But a lot of the things I heard in some of the last few comments, I think my suggestion is you've all been on the right track. You've been providing funds to try different things. We've tried the parklets, the first few, maybe that was on the shoulders of some others, but now there's some funding going towards the semi-permanent parklets. And I think that's forwarding the vision of recovery and placemaking. There's the Grays Lane experiment, so to speak, which is another good one that's been really interesting and very public and had a lot of comment on it. And that was something that you guys sanctioned. And then there was Chamber's installation of all the Christmas the light and art things, which was wonderful in a lot of different parts of town, and that was funded. And so I think that as long as the council continues to foster the creativity and provide hopefully a level of funding for it, because I think that's generally where it always runs into an issue is, well, that's a great idea, but who's going to pay for it? And not that you guys can just dole out blank checks. But I think that there's a lot of creativity driven by the business community, by the chamber, by economic vitality. And as long as everybody continues to have an open mind about it and experiment with some of these things, you know, yeah, I'd love to have a master plan that says, okay, we're going to do this here, this there, and all these different things that are going to occur, that are going to be the sort of the placemaking vision. But unfortunately, I don't find that very realistic. I don't find it achievable in any reasonably quick time frame. But I think having an open mind for some of the suggestions that are coming forward, I think there's a lot of creativity in the business community and the residents of town. And if if you continue that process and continue to be open to those suggestions and somewhat funding them, there's going to be sort of a not inherent, but like a grassroots kind of way that this comes about, and that's really going to demonstrate the character of the community. So I like that. And as far as the rest of it goes, and the streetscape plan and all that, I mean, all the work that staff has done, that Director Morley had just laid out and everything else, I think is right. You can't step in the way of businesses recovering right now. Streetscape would be a wonderful thing to have in the future. I think Councilmember Risto brought up parking. Looks like the Dixon plan is well on its way. That's something that's probably a much larger priority. So allow the parklets to unfold. Some of the other panel members, you know, I think Keiston was nodding when Jeff was commenting about clean and safe. That's 100%. And then it goes to kind of marketing and events and things that get people down here. And a lot of that stuff has been in the works for a long time. So if the council continues to do what it's been doing, and listening up and fostering all these things to occur, I think we're going to get where we need to be, you know, reasonably quickly. So parklets are a good thing. They're being incentivized. Maybe there's a little bit more to do there in the short term. There's some cleanup activities that can be done a little bit for the downtown, and then do all the things that have been on our bucket list for a long time, like parking and somehow addressing beach traffic, but that's for another night. And then in the long term, as Director Morley said, you have time to work on that vision for how the streetscape sort of unfolds after we've kind of gotten some of the priorities off the checklist. So I know that was more than what you asked, but maybe just some responses to a lot of things I heard in the last few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Councilmember Hudas.
Thank you. This has been very interesting conversation and really interesting work done by Ms. Zarnowitz and staff in looking at the fundamental elements of what makes a place like this. And it strikes me that we are in a very interesting position where we have to do everything that we can to help our businesses recover. And if that means moving down the path of parklets in a much greater fashion, I absolutely support that. But coming back to what Director Morley said, there's going to be a point where we may want to evaluate whether that's the right direction to go. And the reason I say it is that I'm far from an expert on downtown streetscapes, but I have really not seen a best practice where dining is next to the traffic. I, read 20 Main Street design documents over the last couple of weeks, and every one of them has a frontage zone that's next to the buildings, often with awnings, then a pedestrian zone, which is what you think about as the sidewalk, and then a transition or planting zone. And that seems to be a best practice. Now, you need a certain amount of room for that to work. I think to accommodate all three of those zones, you need about 15 feet, which I don't think we have, even with the extensions of the K-rail. But I really would encourage us to take a long-term view as well and develop a world-class streetscape for our downtown. I really don't want us to undervalue what we have. It is such a rare thing in California and in the US, and it I think requires some real thought. And I know we need to do what's expedient right now to get the business up and running, but I also think we need to invest in designing a world-class streetscape, incorporating ideas like Vice Mayor Rennie in terms of where we expand the pedestrian aspect. But in the meantime, I think it's important that we continue to look for what's world-class, what's best in class. Are there some examples where, that length of parklet next to traffic is really the best thing? So I think there's a way to balance this by allowing the parklets to move forward, but also thinking about a long-term vision for our street. And as I said, it seems there's a pattern that I've seen here, and I'd love to be challenged on that, or to see some other examples where there's a best practice, but I just haven't seen it myself.
Thank you. Any other council members or commissioners? We've talked quite a bit. Mr. Foley, you gave a great synopsis. I'll almost just say ditto to what you said. And I am going to ask Ms. Wren and Ms. Pravetti to talk about next steps. We have some immediate ideas that were shared. We have some long-term work and thinking that we need to remain focused on. But I think what I've heard consistently is that we are moving in the right direction. Let's continue with the creativity and the innovation, but let's keep an eye on what is the long-term strategy and goals that we would like to work towards, especially as our general plan is underway. So I don't see any hands raised. Manager Pravetti and Ms. Wren, would you like to share some of your thoughts and specifically some next steps that we should anticipate?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What I'd like to do actually is let Ms. Wren do that wrap for us, but let me just thank the panelists for your wonderful, engaging commentary. We really, really appreciate you joining us tonight. I thank the council and the Planning Commission for all the great questions and really engaging on this topic. It's just wonderful, and I'm very excited about the future of Los Gatos. And I also just want to recognize staff for all the work that they put into making this evening happen. And with that, Monica, why don't you go ahead and talk about what's on the horizon? Where can we go next and take this conversation further? Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of things that have stood out to me over the last couple conversations tonight, as well as the last few with council, is really flexibility at this point in time. So Ms. Zarnowitz hit on it in her presentation, is that right now we're looking for a bridge between this long-term streetscape plan that we'd love to see take place and how we can really make the best and the most of recovery. I've often hear, what is our end goal? And I think I've been doing, this job in this town for several years now, and it's always evolving. I think what I've learned more than anything is there's never an end goal. There's a pandemic, or, there's a change, there's something that happens, and it's almost like you're never there because you're always changing. And so I think that the fact that the council's embracing flexibility, embracing streamlining, and having conversations like this tonight really puts us in the best position to move forward and to support our businesses. So for staff, I think our next steps are to continue to work with our businesses on the semi-permanent parklets, continue to implement the pieces of the Dixon parking study that we can at this time. Also recognizing that parking right now is not what it was when the study was released. So how can we embrace the signage and embrace some of the wayfinding and look at implementing pieces and then start to be ready when we get busy. So I see it moving in a couple steps. I also see staff continuing to be available, very personally for our businesses, for our landowners, for our property owners. There's really not one solution. And so I will continue, as I have been, to be available to each of you here tonight and everybody listening. How can I help you? How can I help your businesses? And I think as long as we continue this conversation, the council has asked that we come back in June to report back on where we are with the emergency recovery resolution, where we are with the parklets. Staff will be back in June, and we'll continue to have that open line of communication. So I see those as really our next steps, is just to continue to support, continue to be flexible and continue to have these conversations with the council. And if there's other things that I have missed, Ms. Perfetti, please feel free to chime in. Thank you. And thank you to our panel. I really, truly appreciate each of you. I know we work together on a one-off basis, but it's been so great to have you all here together tonight. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you, staff, for the wonderful work that you've put in tonight. I think the only thing that I want to reemphasize is that we spent some time talking about mixed use and the vital and the need for anyone and everyone interested in what the future of Los Gatos looks like really has to participate in the general plan update right now, because now is the time to really share what your vision is for the town. And I can't even emphasize how important this document and this update is. So please, if you can, please participate. And with that, council, panelists, and commissioners, thank you for your time tonight. I hope this was helpful. I hope this gives you lots of ideas, and I hope it gets you excited about not only what has been happening within our own town, but also what is available, because I really do think that our brain trust here tonight and in our community is strong, and that we will only continue to do great things. So thank you all, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.